Hi, I'm Ef, and this is my remix of Hexaman's track Long Way From Home. I'm going to give you a general rundown of how the track was kind of structured and what the general thought process was. So I wanted to make a drum and bass remix because that's where I feel most comfortable in. And when you look at the top bar here, you can see how the arrangement was laid out. So the track starts with an intro of 32 bars, which is there to help you kind of get into the drop, prepare you for it. And when the drop hits, you get the main melody and the main instruments come in. And we have horns, we have strings, we have whistling, we have guitars. And that's basically drop one. There's also a part with a synth solo, but we'll get into that later. Then comes a breakdown. So the drop one is 64 bars. The breakdown is 32 bars, as was the intro. The breakdown is there to kind of help you get a bit of a break, obviously. And it's an orchestral arrangement. It took a bit of trial and error to get it right, but it's really there just to give you a little bit of a break and kind of get you back into it before the drop 2 hits. And then drop 2 comes. It's similar to the first one. We do get a guitar solo instead of a synth solo this time. And after 64 bars of drop 2, the track ends. And we can maybe get into the melodic idea as well. So the original track it evolves over time, but there isn't a vocal or a very strong melodic element other than the whistling. So I really wanted to use the whistling because that I felt was the strongest melodic element that you could kind of recognize, especially if I'm taking a track and I'm really changing it up. I want the track to still feel like it came from the original, And the way to do it is to use the most of the melodic element and base the track around that. Because if you take the original drums or the guitar or the the bass line, unless that's the melodic element of it, then people will have a hard time understanding if it's just something I came up with myself, or is it a remix, or what it is. So that kind of was the basis for this track. And then I added also the original guitars, which kind of play a counter melody to the whistling. So we can have a listen to that. Very recognizable. And what I did with the horns and the strings is kind of a derivative of the whistling. And when the first drop hits, you hear the same melody played on the horns. And we can have a quick listen to that as well. And bass line is largely also following this kind of structure. So when you're listening to the whistling, the counter melody in the first part of the drop was from the played by the strings, but in the second part we do not have the strings, but the counter melody kind of comes from the bass that's also playing underneath. So if you listen to how the whistles and the bass play together, and then also the guitars play an answer to the melody as well. So you get the idea. It's very strong melodically. It can get repetitive. So in the third part, what we're doing is this is not derivative of any of the melodies. This is just me playing on the MIDI keyboard a part in. And in the second time around, we think it's over here. So over here we have the guitar solo. Now this is not how Gillard played it. What I did is, I think it's in two parts. I did do quite a bit of cutting and replacing, but it's largely played originally like that. But in the second time, or like halfway through, it repeats. This part is the same as this part over here. And that kind of gives the guitar solo some structure as well. You know, something you're familiar with, but then it changes a bit and it's interesting still, but it's more easily digestible, especially first time around when you're listening to it. And with this track, overall, I kind of tried to give a very strong structure to everything. So it was just easier to understand. With jazz track, that's often problematic that it's harder to kind of understand and know what's going to happen and how. I think we can get to the intro now. Now the intro is fairly, I would say, fairly interesting. The main element of it is the strings, and I'll get to the strings first, and then we can listen to the rest of it. But what we have is 2 string patches. And the first one is the Abbey Road Orchestra strings from Spitfire Audio. So it evolves over time. Now the second one, what you hear here is, it sounds very good, but kind of the movement with the strings, and when one goes out and the other one comes in, you can quite clearly hear them. But I wanted to make it very kind of wavy. If you think of waves in an ocean, of it's a never-ending cycle of just going up and down, and you don't really understand where one wave ends and the other one starts. This was kind of the idea. And in order to achieve that, I have Kimber strings that play in different times. They don't move around a lot. They're subtle. They're played very subtly and just slowly, and kind of give you this. It's like the glue that just glues everything together. Now let's listen to these. These are the Olafur Arnold's Kimber strings from Spitfire, and when you put the two together, you can't tell them apart, and it kind of becomes this one really interesting and nice wave of sound. And then it just gets bigger and stronger. Now, that's all of the orchestra. I did plan on using horns to kind of build into the first drop, and they did work, but I found a better idea that kind of sounded more. Yeah, it was the synth that I used in the first drop as well. It's kind of like the idea was to use it as if they were horns, but they just sound better than real horns. So these come in halfway through. And then we also have an electric piano that comes in just before the half point. This is, in my opinion, my favorite part. Gives a very mysterious sound. You can also like hear the chords better, and it's a bit of a way to also tell you where you're at, because when everything is wavy and kind of moving in without any sense of rhythm, it's hard to understand where you're musically at, and it can really put you off when the drop hits and you don't know when it's going to hit. So do try to avoid that, and to avoid that, this piano kind of with the very clear starts in the background helps do that. Now there are a few pads as well, if you can call them that. This Polaris is kind of like a string library, but it's like a synth made out of strings. It's just in the background, giving an atmosphere. And then we have 2 patches of vocals. This again are virtual instruments. The first one is from Spitfire's British drummer toolkit, and it's a female vocal. That's good. It's a very, subtle and quite quietly in the background, but it gives a sense of life to the sound. And then we also have a male vocal patch. This is from, I believe, the labs, Spitfire Labs. It's the Micah's Choir. And the two just work together beautifully. And all of it together without the drums. And we have a pause at the end just to kind of give it that, oh, something's gonna happen. And then we also have the drums that are coming in. Let's take a quick look at those as well. So we start with a head that's... that did nothing. So these are filtered down, opening up as time goes on. The main rhythm pattern is different from the one in the drop. It's the same as it is in the breakdown. And here we have the superior drummer coming in as well. This is not quantized, it's just how I played it in. And some reverse crashes also building into the drop. And when the drop hits, here's an interesting one. The first time the drop hits with the horns, I'm not using the kick. So you can see, where's the kick? Yeah, this is the kick. I have a synth kick and a kick top that's kind of giving you a bit. The kick up is like a natural kick, and the hard bass kick is the synth kick that's really going to give you that power and punch. But this kick is muted the first hit, and instead we have these orchestral heads that I used a lot of delay and reverb on, and when you listen to these are huge. It's a massive hair, and with the horns together, it's it just gives you this bang. If I were to mute it and put normal kick, you're gonna hear what I mean. It's like bum, and then there's nothing. But if I use the orchestral hair, is huge. This is like a nice little detail. Then we have some crashes, some rises throughout the drums. We have, these are a bit hard to see, but at times in the background I have used some classic breakbeats, and these breakbeats in the background, they change a bit. So for example, over here I'm using these in the background, but then as time moves on, it changes to this. Small changes, but they do help a bit. Now, let me think. Let's take a tiny look at the. So here we got since it's a CS80 patch, so we have the main one, and then another patch that's a bit different, layered on top of it, and together they give you quite a full sound. When we start to get to the breakdown, before that there's some interesting things happening. So the rhythm changes quite a bit, but let me see. I think it was on the orchestra that I did it. Again, we have this kind of huge hit, and we have another hit. This one is gated. I don't have the plugin on it anymore. It's but I did use the transgate from Cable Guys. It's just gating, so I used delay on it. I used reverb on it, and then I gated it to give it a rhythm. So you get, and before that, there's one leading up to it. And also, if you listen to the drums change as well, but also the bass. Or maybe no. I thought the bass there was some gating on it as well, but I suppose not. And we also get so the strings come in very quietly. The drums are built down. Strings giving you this wavy feeling. And now if you're wondering why I have so many patches of like strings on it, it's like, isn't one enough? For example, here I have high strings and high strings D. Let's look at the drop for a second. And oops, I saw the wrong one. And so they're playing different octaves. Now over here, we have another one. Now these two are on separate tracks because I wanted to control the endings of them, of the nodes, to better. So it was easier to do it on separate tracks, so I can kind of control one motion and then another one separately, so they're not in the same MIDI track, if it makes sense. I could do it better if they're separate. And then there's a third one, which... Okay, so these are the camera strings, and there's another one that plays like an arpeggio. And it uses a different articulation as well. To give a, it's much more rhythmic. And we have some low strings as well. We do not have a bass here, but these low strings are high passed quite a bit. And then there's a patch that gives you low end. Just quiet, but it's there. Now going into the second drop, we get the same horns and strings. I like the horns because they're really powerful. So we get horns in the lower brass. And then we get the strings. And then we get to the guitars. We've already all gone through it. And that is basically it. And in the outro we get just the main melody once. It's like a bullet point ending. Now, in terms of the mix is quite simple. Whatever needed to be done, I tried to do it while sound designing. And some of it is already, I've already printed it. But it's all quite simple. We have a lot of these P42 climax instances. These are great. I like the saturation. It sounds very good. You have filters. The filters also sound good, and a bit of an like a shaping EQ. It's not. It's quite broad, but it allows me to get rid of unnecessary low end, get rid of unnecessary high end as well. This high end adds up just as well as bottom end. And so if you want something to be bright, then you can't have everything bright. You need to have some things that are not as bright as the main element. And the saturation, it sounds good, gives you a bit of presence, and doesn't take a lot of CPU power, which is a problem with these big projects with a lot of virtual instruments and stuff. We have Seventh Heaven reverbs. I've used quite a bit of these throughout the track, and the voice compressors. These are used because they have the ability to for a sidechain, and now in this case I haven't actually set a preview, but often I do set the preview as well. So because the compressors, they tend to take time before they react, a little bit of time. So with a preview you're able to make the sidechain react quick enough. And also again, in this case I didn't use it, but in some cases where the high end is very important, then you're able to filter it so the compressor only acts on the low end. So the sidechaining only, changes the low end of the track that's getting sidechained, and it sounds a lot more natural that way. But in this case, it wasn't needed, so I didn't use it as a wide bandwidth compressor. Now, if I were to mix it now, I would actually use this plugin, because it does what I'm trying to do with the voice compressor. It's much easier and better at it, and it takes less CPU power, so you can also sidechain it with the kick here and set it to audio mode, and so it gets triggered by the audio, and it's just allows you to get a much better sidechain. It reacts quick enough, and you have more control. With compressors, the problem is that if you, for example, change the kick, then the compressor, if the kick length changes, then for example, a longer kick, then the compressor, you need to go back and change all the release times on it, and it's a lot of fiddling around to do. With these, it's quite nice, and also you can limit it to just work on the low end as well, just as with the voice compressor, so it doesn't affect the high end. In some cases, this really makes a huge difference. Let's see what else we have. I've used the Echo Boy from Soundtones quite a bit. I like it because you can set the timings really quickly and get a feedback, low cut, high cut, everything you need is there. It's just great for effects. It's simple, but it works. And again, it goes into 7th Heaven. And this is a guitar track that I can show you. It's not on the main guitar, but I have duplicated some of the parts of the guitar that I want to send into a delay, and then just send only these to the delay. And what it allows me to do, instead of automating, if you automate the volume of this, for example, if I go here and turn this output down, but if I have a delay plugin on it, what's going to happen is this part here is still going to be delayed, and you're still going to be able to hear this note in the delay. But if I do it this way, that note was never there, so the delay can't, emphasize it. It's going to be much cleaner. And if we listen to these two, you can hear how it just adds this massive effect. Then I've used the transient shaper from Softtube quite a bit. This allows, for example, here you have the sustain knob. Allows me to make it shorter. For example, also, let me see if I have any on here. I do. So the breakbeat. This is a 2-track recording. So if you don't have it on, it's got a lot of sustain and it's quite full. If it use the transient shaper, it just kind of cleans it up and I get more of the transients rather than a very full audio. And in a busy mix, not having too much sustain on sounds is quite good. The less is happening, the more room you have for other things. I will get into the bass design as well for a moment. So the bass is quite simple. It's 2 patches of serum. We have a sine wave for the subs. It's just a sine wave. And then we also have another one that's like an addition to the sine wave. It's more complex sound and has more harmonics and something it's easier to hear on systems that can't produce that bottom end. And the filter opens up over time as well. That's really it. And if we look at the plugins that I've used on it, there is the Wise EQ. There's EQ because the higher notes, they tend to get louder. Then use the EQ to compensate for that. So, and if we take, let me see if I have span somewhere. I do have it here. Another one is the compressor. Again, this one for sidechaining. Here I have used the preview and it's wideband. And then another EQ, a dynamic one, stock from Cubase. But let's take a quick look at the. So the other one is the top one. This one has a lot of saturation. You can see I've really cranked up the input and the saturation as well. And then we go into an EQ. It's really, you can getting the mids up, and then it goes into a reverb. And yeah, reverb on bass, great. Just and especially this one, it has this low frequency reverb, and it's just with low frequencies, the 7th Heaven tends to work really well. Some reverbs really break if you give them any low frequencies. This one handles them perfectly. You could send that sine wave in there, and it's gonna sound good. But yeah, the reverb's on the one that doesn't have that much low end on it, because you don't want too much of the reverb there. And yeah, let's get back to the span for a moment. What I want to show here is the consistency of the sub. This is an important thing. What you don't want is you won't want the low end to be wobbly, and kind of want the notes to stay here. And I'm targeting 36 dBs, and that's with the Wise. I can kind of just look at the graph and see how my low end is doing. It's not really dependent on my headphones and how they play it. And if we also, like, these are sidechains as well, every kick hit. Now this patch, if I look at the oscillator one, so this is the higher patch, I'm not actually generating the fundamental, I'm only generating the harmonics of the sound. And this is because I don't want the fundamental to, they're all both playing at the same octave. And if I generate the fundamental as well, what's going to happen is the two are going to be fighting against each other. So I have the sine wave in the bottom and then have this on top of it. Now you can just use an EQ and high pass, but I find it's better to never generate that frequency in the first place, and then you have less problems down the road. But some of those low frequencies still get generated if you use distortion, so you get those harmonics in the low end as well, so that's why I still high passed. But technically you could get away without even high passing that way. And we get the Wheel of Death. There we go. That's pretty much it. On the master bus, this is again quite simple. We have this plugin again, and this time not doing a lot, just a bit, but it does affect the sound quite a bit. And I have the oversampling option on this time as well. It gets a bit louder and it gets some of the higher frequencies out. It's a bit of presence that comes there. And then there's a newfangled elevate for limiting and some transient shaping. So at about 4.6K, I found it was the transients were just a little bit harsh, so I took them down here, and that's it. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.